It's so funny. I'm not going to say it. I'll tell you in a second. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Asian American, Pacific Islander, Desi American, or APITA History Month opening ceremony. Yes, mouthful, and we're very excited. We have a great program here for you today, and we are looking forward to hearing from our keynote speaker. So we are, again, really excited, really excited. I see people joining us. Hello, hello, hello. Thank you, thank you. Okay, I'll start one more time, make sure everyone heard. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Again, this is our opening ceremony for our Asian American, Pacific Islander, Desi American, or APITA Heritage Month program. We have a very exciting keynote who's a guest here with us. But before we get started, we will say a couple things about our normal things for streaming. One is we have been having a little updates with Facebook, so we are now actually streaming via our YouTube page. So if you want to watch it later, it will be via that platform. In addition, it's similar to when we've been on Facebook. You are welcome to have your cameras on at any given moment. That just means if a sound is made or you unmute yourself, you could be seen on the YouTube stream, but we welcome your lovely faces. We do ask that you do remain on mute until there is a question and answer session at the end with our keynote speaker. Okay, I think that will get us started. So with that, we are going to start our program today with some welcome remarks from our SIU system president, Dr. Dan Mahoney, and we're really excited to have him here with us today, and I will pass the floor to him for those opening remarks.
Well, thank you, Lindy. And first of all, I just want to say welcome to everybody, and we thank you for being here today. This celebratory month actually began with the thoughts of one woman, Jeannie Ju, who was a Capitol Hill staffer, who noticed during the bicentennial in 1976 that there wasn't a lot of celebration or recognition given to Asian Pacific Americans. So after her work and the work of Ruby Moy, another Capitol Hill staffer in 1978, there was a proclamation passed by Congress that designated the week of May 4th of that year as Asian Pacific American Heritage Week. But it was not an annual celebration, so the bill had to be resubmitted every year to keep the recognition alive. It finally was designated as a full month and an annual recognition in 1992. And at that time, it was titled Asian Pacific American Heritage Month and still recognized nationally as such. However, many campuses across the United States, including ours, have adapted the month to be Asian American, Pacific Islander, and Desi American, or APITA, to incorporate really all of a deeper understanding of the nuances of the Asian identity. And it's, again, a reminder that this recognition would not be possible if it was not for Jeannie Ju and Ruby Moy. So we should remember their names, their contributions, and their efforts that brought us here today. And I think it's a great reminder of the determination of two people can do a whole lot of things if they're working well and working hard together. And so I want to really recognize them today. At SIU, we've really been focused very strongly in the last year on our anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, which incorporates really a lot of things. And we want to make changes, but I always say changes need to be informed. And so part of being able to make changes in any institution or any organization is making informed changes. And one of the ways we are informed is by learning and increasing our knowledge and understanding of the different identities that exist within our community. And so first of all, I want to say thank you to our keynote speaker for being here today, Dr. Ling. We're so pleased that you could join us. And really thank you to everybody who's joined us for this event so that, again, we can all learn together and move forward more productively as an organization. So again, thank you for being here and thank you for being part of our celebration this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, President Mahoney. Really greatly appreciate those words. And with that, I would like to now pass the floor for opening remarks to our Chancellor, Dr. Randy Pembroke, for some additional remarks, because we're really excited when both our President and our Chancellor are here. So Chancellor Pembroke.
Well, thank you, Lindy. Thank you for that introduction. It's great to have everyone with us this afternoon. We really appreciate you being here. As President Mahoney said, APITA month was established for the month of May, which if you've paid attention, May gets to be kind of busy in higher education. We have things like finals week and commencements. And so we're going to celebrate really fast all month in May to pay attention to APITA and the things that are important that we should be noticing. You may be wondering why May. May was selected for two reasons. First, it was the date that we know that we think the first known Japanese immigrant came to the United States 1843. And then May was also the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869, which you may remember from your history courses, right? There were about 20,000 Chinese workers that participated in the Transcontinental Railroad construction. And so the positive part about APITA is that we remember, I hope we remember to honor members of our community who identify in this way. And so that's a really important thing for us to focus on. But it's also important for us to remember the history, some of the negative history that goes with this month. And again, why it's important for us. Things like targeting of individuals of Asian heritage, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. There are things that we should remember and we should vow to make better. So this month is a way for us to realize our duty as allies of APITA colleagues and support the community. And I hope that this program today will give you some things to reflect on and to consider as it relates to this month. We have already had one panel, Stop Asian Hate, and we'll be having part 2 of that panel coming up this week on Thursday the 6th at 6 p.m. So there's a plug to come to panel number 2. We hope you'll do that. I encourage you to attend. I also want to say for those who are on the call, we recently established and made public our dashboard, which talks about the anti-racism efforts at SIUE. There are 78 recommendations that were made by the Anti-Racism Task Force. I want to commend Vice Chancellor Jessica Harris for her work on that, to say thank you. And I hope everyone will pay attention to the things that are going on our campus. So with that, again, let me say thank you. Welcome to Dr. Ling, our guest speaker. And I just look forward to the rest of this presentation and the rest of the month of May for many, many reasons.
Thank you so much, Chancellor. We appreciate your words as well. Thank you both again, President and Chancellor, for being here this evening. And now we get to move on to a very exciting part of the program, our keynote speaker. So that you all know, we will have the keynote speaker speak for her time as she has allotted, and she has said that she's very open to a question and answer session. So if you have questions that come up while she's doing her keynote, feel free to either direct message me. Again, I'm Lindy Wagner, and you can put those into the chat and I can make sure she gets those, or you can hold them and then we'll let you ask those questions once we open up the floor for the question and answer session at the end. So just know she's really open to having that dialogue, and we're really excited about that opportunity with her today. Now, the introduction. I can't wait to tell you more about her. So our guest today is Dr. Hu-Ping Ling, who is a professor of history at Truman State University. She's an internationally renowned historian and prolific award-winning writer. And she's the founder of the Asian and Asian American Studies program at Truman State University. She's also a visiting fellow of the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. The Thank you. I know I didn't practice well. Thank you. Scholar, chair professor of the Chinese Ministry of Education. She's the funding inaugural book series editor of Asian American Studies Today for Rutgers University Press. She's also a Ford Foundation Prize-winning author, has authored and edited 30 books and published over 200 articles on Asian American studies, including topics on immigration and ethnicity, assimilation and adaptation, transnationalism, family and marriage, employment patterns, and community structures. Additionally, her recent books include Chinese Chicago, Race, Transnational Migration and Community since 1870, as well as Chinese St. Louis from Enclave to Cultural Community, Temple Press 2004. So we're also really excited because she did us a very gracious work for us and actually has tailored this very keynote for our specific requests here on our campus and in our region. So we're really looking forward to this. And with that, I'd love to pass the floor now to Dr. Lin.
Well, thank you, Lindy, very much for your wonderful introduction. I'm really honored to be here to share and to celebrate our APITA activity. I'm going to, oh, all right, okay. Take me a second to share the screen. All right, is everything all right? Okay. Okay, so the title of my presentation is Asian Americans in the Heartland, Transnational Migration, Race, and Community Building. Everything here I think is straightforward, except the heartland I'd like to explain a little bit. Heartland here, it means Midwest. And both terms actually are interchangeably used oftentimes. Both convene the similar area. Both roughly covers 12 states, even varies. But I use the heartland. I felt maybe it's more accurate because this 12 states is really exactly in the heart of the United States. Okay, well, Midwest, people might think it's somewhere in the West. I'm going to first outline what I'm going to cover today. We don't have time to talk cover all Asians in the heartland, but we're going to focus on 2 case studies of Chinese in St. Louis and the Chinese in Chicago. Okay. Before we start that, I need to give you a little bit of historical background on Chinese migration. Then we will move on to our important part for today's celebration. That is the present challenges for Asian Americans. Because when I was preparing this talk, as Lindy said, Professor Liu Min and myself, we had several meetings about what we should cover. Okay, so she convened the planning committee's hope they like me to share my research in Midwest, and especially in conjunction with the current situation, Asian American hate crimes. So I have it here loosely present challenges for Asian Americans, but we're going to look at the recent hate crimes and how we're going to handle the situation, how we're going to deal with it as Asian or non-Asian Americans. Okay. First, the migration. Chinese migration in the United States started mid-19th century. But you can trace there's individual cases who came here even in the 17th century. But the large-scale Chinese labor arrived in this country after 1849, responding to the gold rush, okay, which attracted all the laborers across the world to come here to make a quick money. So Chinese also heard the news was discovered in California. So by 1882, that is the time when Chinese Exclusion Act was passed. There are about 370,000 Chinese in the West Coast, mainly labor in gold mines. When the gold was exhausted, many of them, around 10,000 of them, worked on the western part of Transcontinental Railroad. In 1869, when the railroad construction was finished, the Chinese, many of them, landed up in agricultural field in California. And also so happened in 1870s, Americans suffered a Great Depression, and that resulted in a very strong anti-Chinese sentiment on the West Coast. And there was a slogan at the time, the Chinese must go. Okay? So Chinese were perceived as unassimilable, and they came here as a cheap labor or as a strike brokers Okay, when white laborers organized a strike, the capitalists would hire Chinese to replace them. So under this strong sentiment, some Chinese did return to China, but many more remained here. And some still remain on West Coast, but many more moved to other parts of the country, like Midwest, East, and the South. And Chinese exclusion law that was passed in 1882. So mainly it banned the Chinese labor from coming, okay, because this legislature was passed under pressure of different interest groups, including laborers, white laborers, farmers, nativists, politicians. So they don't want to have Chinese labor to compete for the job here. However, there are some groups of Chinese who were exempt, like merchants, students, diplomats, teachers, and temporary visitors who could still come. So this exclusion laws was initially for 10 years, but in 1892, it was renewed for another 10 years, then 1902 again. Finally, it was indefinitely. However, in 1943, when US entered the World War II in 41, but this Chinese exclusion law was finally repealed in 1943 because China joined the Great Alliance, and the Chinese fought briefly in the China-Burma theater. Okay, so the Americans' public opinion about the Chinese suddenly 100-degree changed. So this exclusion law was repealed. Another landmark event I want to briefly mention here is 1965 Immigration and Naturalization Act. The official name was called Hart-Celler Act, but generally it's known as Immigration and Naturalization Act. So this act, the major part of the act is that it abolished the previous quota system, okay, based on the national origin. So each country has a certain number, certain quota. So under that system, the quota for China was only 105 a year. In the 1965 Immigration Act, and I'm sure if we're familiar with American history, was under pressure that, it was finally passed by bipartisan support. But mainly there's pressure from Democratic parties feeling that this national origin-based formula was not fair. It's racial discrimination. So the new act laid out 3 principles for the admission of immigration. So majority of them, about 70% or more than 70%, are the relatives of American citizens and permanent residents. Second categories are the professionals and the skilled laborers, okay, who possess the labor which is needed in demand in the American labor market. And the third is about 4 to 5% of the total quota that goes to refugees, okay, the people who were chased out of their country because of war or political persecution. So this law dramatically changed the Americans' democratic picture. The result was more Asian, African, and Latino immigrants came. Even originally, the bill was designed to have more Europeans. Okay? They want to keep homogeneity of the country. But once this law passed, not many Europeans had a desire to come. So as a result, we have many more Asians, African, and Latinos in the country. So this democratic change demographic change, also resulted in the largest structural, economic, social change in the 1960s and 70s. Okay. Currently, the total Asian American population, or AAPI, and right now we also use AAPI, and we use APIDA, right? APIDA. But in a lot of the documents, Asian Americans still use a lot, and all of these different terms also are used interchangeably. So the Asian Americans now, according to the 2020 census, which was just released last week, about 19 million of them among the total population of 330 million. Okay, so roughly they make up 6% of total population. And among the 19 million Asian Americans, about a quarter are Chinese. Okay, so the Chinese is the largest group of Asian Americans, or AAPI, or APIDA. So after the Chinese were pushed out of the West Coast, where did they go? They dispersed to other parts of the country, like I said, Midwest, East, and South. So in this talk, I'm going to focus on Chinese communities in St. Louis and Chicago. Even Chicago is a large community, but I put St. Louis first here because Chinese community in St. Louis was established about a decade earlier. Okay. And we don't have time to cover both sites in a very detailed fashion. I'm here want to just summarize some commonality and the differences between these two cities, okay, the Chinese communities in these two cities. There are several similarities as well as some differences. In terms of their commonalities, both are port cities. So Chicago is located at the 5 Great Lakes, right? It's known as Hinterland Port, while St. Louis was at the confluence of Missouri and Mississippi rivers. And it also was regarded as a river town. So they both provided easy access for the immigrants or remigrants to come. And in both cities, the Chinese community are located in the downtown business area before 1965. And in this community, in both cities, the dominant community structure or organization is Anliang. Okay, Anliang is a Chinese term. The literal meaning means An means peace, Liang means goodness. So you can understand Anliang as earlier version of Chamber of Commerce. Okay, so this was old version of Chinese Chamber of Commerce. However, Anliang was fraternity organization, and the nature of this organization is mutual aid, self-reliant. So the early Chinese community is very self-reliant. They take care of their own business. They help each other. So in this insulated and isolated Chinese community, they survived. And the leader of Anliang, sometimes it's also called Anliang Tang. The leader of Anliang is often dubbed as the mayor of Chinatown. But after 1965, the community model in both cities began to diverge. In St. Louis, the original Chinatown in the downtown area, which was known as Hop Alley. In 1966, Hop Alley was torn down, totally leveled, to make way for the new Bush Stadium. And the Chinese business and the Chinese residents there were forced to move and relocate in another area. Then they're trying to establish a new Chinatown in this relocation, which is in the Del Mar area. However, in 1979, another wave of urban renewal movement in this Chinese community was forced to move again. So after that, the Chinese community leaders, major businessmen, activists felt there was no need to start a physical Chinatown, okay? Because this continuous frustration from municipal policies of urban renewal or gentrification. And they felt Chinatown oftentimes is associated with the negative image of gunfighting, crime, gambling, prostitution. So they did not have much incentive to form a new Chinatown. However, Chinese is still there. There are about, according to 20,000 census, there are close to 10,000 Chinese still there. By 2020 census, close to 20,000 or so. So where are they? Since Chinatown is not there anymore, where are these around 10,000 Chinese? Even the locals were not clear. When I did my research on this book project, oftentimes the locals would ask the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, said, I heard we had a Chinatown was called Hop Alley. Where is Hop Alley? Or where was Hop Alley? Do we still have a Chinatown? Okay, so there's a question like that. So where are they? So after 1970s, the Chinese residents there become dispersed, scattered around in most suburb communities. Well, in Chicago, it developed into I call it the Tripartite Divide. Okay, there are three centers, okay, like a tripart. The major one, which has a large population of Chinese residents, is called South Chinatown. And then after 1970s, because the influx of ethnic Chinese from Vietnam, from Cambodia, and from Laos, they were allocated by the Immigration Authority to Chicago. So suddenly this South Chinatown become even more crowded, okay? Because in 1960s, there's a large wave of new immigrants came. Now in 70s, the more ethnic Chinese came. So South Chinatown could not absorb this new population anymore. So many of the new immigrants moved to north part area along Broadway and Argyle, which was also the ethnic enclave. Okay, the Jewish community was there and some other ethnic communities. And there's also Chinese, some Chinese were there. And finally, this area was revitalized by the ethnic Chinese. And so it became multi-ethnic Chinatown, people called North Town. The difference between North and South is that South Chinatown mainly are Chinese, and it's a major tourist site for outsiders. And also the major business, the Chinatown commerce is concentrated in South Chinatown. While North Chinatown is mixed, okay, mixed with Chinese, Cambodians, Vietnamese, Laotians. There are many Vietnamese restaurants, about 20 or so. A couple of them list in the restaurant list as the ones really popular in that area. Okay. Then in the north part of Chicago, mainly around the Evanston, Skokie, that area, there are some pockets of suburban Chinese communities. However, there's no identifiable physical gathering. So I also call it cultural community. Okay, so this term I coined it when I was doing Chinese in St. Louis. Then when I wrote Chinese in Chicago, I felt, well, there's a lot of similarities. And this cultural community concept has been widely accepted by scholars in the Asian American study or ethnic history or immigration. You can find a similar type of ethnic community in many places. So now we're going to look at the Chinatowns, okay, both Chinatowns prior to 1965. And they are conveniently located in downtown. Let me see this map. Okay, so first let's look at St. Louis. So this is a St. Louis map, very busy map. Okay, but this is a map I copied from the real map and identified the Chinatown in this area. And the west side, that's Mississippi. So when we zoom in, just this Chinatown area, okay, which is known as Hop Alley. Here, this gray shaded area is where Hop Alley was located. Okay, so it was bordered by 7th Street and 8th Street, east, west, and the north by Market Street, and the south by Walnut Street. So it's roughly several blocks. And the name of Hop Alley was not very clear how it came. Okay, but anyway, because the early Chinese laborers, most of them resided in a boarding house located in a small alley here behind 7th, 8th Street. It's called Hop Alley. So therefore, this entire area is known as Hop Alley. So Hop Alley became a nickname of Chinatown in St. Louis. And I also want to notice that, okay, north of Market Street is Chestnut Street. And the Chestnut Street is the so-called Chest Valley is located. That's where the African-American community was. Okay, so you can tell, oftentimes those ethnic minority communities, they are in adjacent areas, they are mixed. And in Chicago, okay, this is a Chicago map. For the time being, I'm just going to focus on this black spot. This is a so-called Chinatown, South Chinatown. Even initially, Chinese first settled in this smaller dot area, okay, which is so-called loop area. It's called loop because it was concurrently with the original cable car area. So here in the loop area, there are many ethnic businesses like Italian shops, Jewish tailor shops, and the Chinese grocery stores, all located there on the South Clark Street. But in 1912, there's also unfriendly feeling towards the Chinese. So Chinese in this area, the landlords raised the rent. So they were forced to move to south where the property value was cheaper. And most Chinese business after 1912 moved to Southtown, okay? So this is where the early Chinese community started. And in this Chinatown community, they survived and even thrived based on this so-called niche community, a niche economy. So-called niche economy is the occupations which were now embraced by the mainstream society, like laundry, grocery store, restaurant. And the Chinese, when they were excluded from the larger labor market because of their lack of industrial skill and the lack of English speaking ability. So they could only find those kind of occupations to make money. So laundry, grocery store, restaurant, these three occupations have been known as the three pillars of the Chinatown economy. Okay, whether it's on West Coast or East Coast or Midwest. When Chinese were chased out of the West Coast, they carried this economic structure with them in the Midwest. So now let's look at the laundry first. I'd like to use the Samoa laundry as an example of how Chinese operating this laundry business. For the audience, I believe we have some people in audience from St. Louis. Okay, for St. Louisans, I'm sure you probably heard about the Samoa laundry. It was famous because it was the only survival laundry after 1960s. While in the late 19th century and early 20th century, there are 200 or more, excuse me, Chinese hand laundries in St. Louis. But after 1950s, when machine laundry, the Cohen operated laundry was available. So Chinese hand laundry, one by one, were closed. So Samoa laundry was the most resilient one, and it survived until 1986, when the two proprietors, okay, is a pair of elderly brothers, older brother by the name of Samoa, and that's also the laundry's name, and his younger brother, 2 years younger than him. They came here in early 19th century, first to Chicago, but they didn't like the cold weather there. Then they came to St. Louis to join their uncle. Their uncle already was running Samoa laundry along with 3 other laundries. Okay, he was doing very well, but he felt he was aging. So he asked his 2 nephews come, and they inherited the business, and they continued the name and the way of operation. So you can see here, they are using this. This is a really ancient dryer. They have been used it for decades. Okay. On the left, this picture shows their window. Okay, it was located on 14881 Lake. And here, this picture was taken in 1976 when the laundry was forced to close because of the construction of medical school of WashU was going to make a parking lot there. So they're going to remove, ask these 2 elderly move out, and they're going to level the laundry and make a parking lot. So these 2 elderly men couldn't do anything. So they put a sign there, said, "We are closing." Okay. So there's a very, very poignant story on the Save Samoa laundry. Okay. But they still survived thanks to a group of American customers. Okay, they're loyal customers who are very fond of these 2 brothers, and who are also have a strong sense of justice. Okay, they felt these 2 elderly in their 80s. They speak very little English, and they work very hard. Okay, look at their living quarter on this right picture. Their laundry, just 1-room house, 1 room, just 1 room for everything. Okay, front, they have a washing machine, and there's a counter like here, the counter, there's abacus and some paperwork. Then behind the counter, there's a shelf kind of stuff, a structure where they put the cleaned parcels there, waiting for the customer to pick them up. Then the remaining part of the room was filled with washing machines and furnace. Okay, several furnaces used to dry the clothes, and they have many wires, okay, crisscrossed above head, near the ceiling. When they have laundry done, they would hang the laundry on those wires, and the furnace, right, the heat from the furnace will dry them up. Then they will iron them. So this is really a very tedious and tiring work. And they worked from dawn to midnight, 7 days a week. They never took off. Since they came here, they never returned to China. One of the brothers was married, left his wife and the children behind. Another was bachelor. So they spent more than 50 years, 50, 60 years in St. Louis. They paid their tax. And now they're forced to go. So those enthusiasts, okay, the supporters of San Juan Laundry, organized the campaign. They hired a lawyer and they negotiated with the city government, and finally convinced the city to let these two elderly live on the property until they naturally dies. Okay, and younger brother, the Samoa, the older brother died in 1984, and the younger brother continued to run the laundry until 1986. He passed away. Then immediately, WashU, okay, they have this project, called the New Development Project. They came right away, cleaned up this laundry, only gave this community activists a little time to save some remnants of the laundry. Now they are hosted in St. Louis Museum, St. Louis Art and History Museum. So why the Chinese could survive mainly before 1965, mainly on laundry business. Number one is because they work very hard and they have a very low charge, okay? So this low fee was a major attraction, make them compete and beat other rivalries. So in late 19th century and early 20th century, there are about 350 Chinese in St. Louis. However, there is 350 Chinese roughly operating over 200 laundries. That provided 60% of the laundering service of the city. Okay, so this is really remarkable contribution. And the second type of business is a grocery store. Here, I want to move to Chicago, okay, because Chicago's grocery store and not only is retailing, but also wholesaling, and also there's many traveling stores. Okay, the grocery business in Chicago, there are following characteristics. Okay, I use the red shade here for your attention. First, they are operated based on the transnational ethnic networks. So what does it mean? Transnational means, their activity is not just limited within US, but it's between US and their homeland. Okay, so back and forth this movement. So their business transaction, they might procure their supplies from China and shift them to US and retail and wholesale them here. And their employees mostly come from the ethnic network. Like in this store, it was called Hiplon. Owner's name was Moy. Okay, there are 3 Moy brothers, but they hired their clansmen, altogether 35 of them, mostly men with the surname of Moy. Okay, Moy was #1 clan in Chicago. And they had 35 partners. Each partner contributed $1,000. So their total capitalization was more than 41,000. So in this day, that was a much larger scale. Okay, so they're not only selling merchandise, groceries, they also served as a bank. Okay, because there's no bank for Chinese. Okay, only later on in the 1930s, there's Lake Bank. That was only Lake Bank hired 2 Chinese-speaking employees. So they are doing service with Chinese. However, in the early days, the Chinese had no place to put their money. They either put the money in their trunk, in their bedroom, or more likely, they put their money into the account of the grocery store. So the grocery store actually served the function of banking, and they would keep the money, and they could either invest the money in the grocery business or restaurant business. And if they want to save money and send their saving to their homeland, and the merchants would also handle that business, send them by check or by whatever form. The Chinese call them 钱庄. Okay, that means it's also the Chinese banking structure connected Chinese business here in the United States and the banks in Hong Kong. Okay, then from there, further send it to their home village in Guangdong province. And occasionally, and those grocery stores also served as a hotel for travelers or for their other country fellows or clansmen who came to the city for a short time. The second characteristic is the grocery business in Chicago not only service the local residents, but also it served as a center of the wholesale grocery and other merchandise in the entire Midwest region. And an example here is this grocery store called Chuanyuan Chongji. It was also a very large business business store, and it had a branch in other states, okay, Midwest area. So they would, from time to time, they would dispatch their salesperson to their branch, okay, to collect bills and fill the new orders. And the third type of this grocery, or the third characteristics, is traveling grocery stores. Okay, so those are the stores. They just load their supplies in a big truck. Okay, why do they need to have this traveling truck? Because the most Chinese residents were still still the laundry owners. And the laundry men work 7 days a week. They only had half day on Sunday to take off. And that's the time they would come to Chinatown, the downtown, to do their grocery shopping. But in those days, there's no refrigerator. So by the middle of the week, they run out of their fresh meat, fresh vegetables. But they don't have time come to the Chinatown to shop. So traveling grocery store emerged to meet such a need. So they would take goods, go to the place near the Chinese laundries. Okay, so this in this type of grocery business, you also see this ethnic type. Okay, so people who are running traveling grocery store, if who had a lot of cousins, okay, who are running laundries, and he will have more stable business. Otherwise, you depend on the random customers, the business is unstable. And the third type of business, restaurant. And in Chicago, the restaurant was not just chop suey or chow mein, okay, those fast Chinese, Americanized Chinese food. Most people are familiar. Chicago was regarded as a place where Chinese developed their fine dining. Okay, they served, the restaurateurs here served as pioneers of Chinese fine dining. One restaurant by the name of Kinjiolo Mandarin Restaurant was extravagant, okay, very luxuriously furnished. And the owner is this couple here. The man's name is Qin Fangfoi. Okay, Fangfoi was his given name and Qin was his surname. So now you can see that there are also a lot of Qins in Chicago. Moys, Qins, and Wangs, those are the major clans. Okay, so based on this ethnic ties, that's how they run their business, make their business more lubricated, more smoothly. And not only they're extravagant, but also they're large. There are many sizable restaurants. For example, Golden Pheasant Inn. The total capital investment was 75,000. And there are 30 shareholders. And the restaurant could hold 175 tables. And they hired 75 employees. Okay, so that scale of labor force, even in today's restaurant, is large. Okay, they have to have several sub-managers to manage different sections of the employees. And the Chinese restaurateurs were also good at promoting their business. For example, they invested a lot of money to form a Huamei Corporation. So this is a corporation in charge of the Chinese display in the 1893 World Fair. It was held in Chicago. But because the Chinese government was boycotting, okay, because there's a country, two countries clashed, there's some diplomatic tension. So Chinese Qing government refused to dispatch delegate. So the Chinese decided they take it in their hands. So they formed this corporation and they run the entire show. So there they had this golden pavilions. You probably can still see some of them. Most of them were tore after the exhibition was over. But I think we can still see some signs, and also there's tons of work about this fair. They also built a Chinese cafe there, serving the visitors Chinese dishes. Okay, so those dishes are really authentic Chinese dishes. You have to use chopsticks. So they imported the chopsticks, China, and the special chef, okay, well-trained chefs from Hong Kong to serve the banquet. Okay, so they displayed that at the World Fair. But the Chinese in both cities or in America at large were portrayed by media as this, it's a very stereotyped, racialized, dehumanized, peculiar people, okay? They are called rat-eating people, okay, like you see here. This is a restaurant in St. Louis. One Theodore Dreiser, who was a young reporter for St. Louis Republican, he went to Chinese restaurant to gather information, and he wrote a long, lengthy story about St. Louis Chinatown. And there are a couple of cartoons accompany his story. So this is one of them. So in this restaurant, you see on the wall, that's menu. Some crab, a dish crab. And here is onion braised with rat, 15 cents a dish. I doubt that was real. Normally Chinese don't eat rat. Only those fishermen when they are going to the high sea. It was believed that if you eat the rat, not the house rat, but the field rat, okay, that's different type. They are larger and not as scary as the house mouse rat. But hardly nobody eat rats. But however, they were portrayed as rat-eating people. You see here, this man eating a rat. We can see the head of the rat and the rat tails dangling here outside the wall. So after 1965, St. Louis Chinatown was leveled. Okay, in Chicago, this tripartite divide emerged, as I said earlier, into South Chinatown, North Chinatown, and the suburban cultural community. And now I'm going to explain this map more in a more detailed way. Okay, so-called tripartite divide refers to South Chinatown. Okay, so that's here since 1912. The population in this area right now are probably around 10,000. Okay, about 8,000 or so in South Chinatown. But in the recent decades, there's a nearby adjacent neighborhood was called Bridgeton. So right now, actually, South Chinatown is Chinatown, Bridgeton altogether. Okay, that's South Chinatown. And North Chinatown, the multi-ethnic North Chinatown is here. This is Broadway, and this street goes east-west is Argyle. So here, the newly arrived immigrants from Southeast Asia established their business here. Grocery stores, restaurants, herb stores, and also there are some residents there. And then here, I'm sorry, can't make it, it's covered partially. So this is Evanston and Skokie. So in those areas, there are some pockets of Chinese suburban communities. So I call them suburban Chinese community, cultural community. And South Chinatown, as reflected in this picture, I'm sure probably many of you have been in Chicago numerous times, or some may came from Chicago. Okay, this is South Chinatown. You can see the Chinatown Gate, which is a symbol of Chinatown across the world. Everywhere, they must have this gate. And this building, okay, with the exotic style, architecture style, is Anliang building. Okay, we already discussed Anliang. That was the major community organization. Anliang was very powerful, not only controlled the administration, but also it had a large holding of business in the Chinese community. So Anliang was very powerful, and this Anliang building was built in 1920s. It was a combination of Western and Eastern architecture. Initially, it was the headquarters of Anliang, and it was really elegantly, extravagantly furnished. But later on, it changed into a school, Chinese language school, or community associations and different functions. And on the ground floor, it has a series of front shops, okay, all kinds of Chinese business, grocery stores, gift stores, and other business. Today, this building is still there, okay, still in operation. This is South Chinatown, but noting this picture, actually this is in the opposite direction. The South Chinatown is since 1980s expanded itself, almost doubled its size. Okay, so it purchased the this open area. This is a Wentworth. It's a big avenue. Cross Wentworth Avenue. That large area was called the Santa Fe Railroad Yard, and the railroad was not in use for decades. So the Chinatown lobbied, okay, Chinese community lobbied the city, and they purchased that area, and they renovated it and started senior residence building and apartment housing and some Chinese community associations and some business there. So now this newly developed South Chinatown actually looks very nice, okay, very prosperous. And it serves as a model, very different model of the urban Chinatown compared to San Francisco and New York. I think Chicago is very unique and it's doing very well, okay? And this is North Chinatown, a multi-ethnic North Chinatown. You can see here is a restaurant and grocery stores, and here's another grocery stores. And this is International Mall located in Westmont, okay? So because this international market, suburban Chinese American would come here to do their shopping in the weekend. And this population, this traffic also stimulated other Chinese business, okay? There's some Chinese accountants or doctor's office or some home associations or community service centers also around this area, okay? But you cannot call it as a Chinatown because a so-called Chinatown is defined as a commercial and residential combined area, okay? Well, in the St. Louis, since Hop Alley was removed, they did not have another Chinatown. And they dispersed in all these South County, West County, suburb communities or municipalities. And in downtown, there are very few Chinese remaining there. So the Chinese now congregate during the weekend in Chinese language schools and Chinese churches, or in the Chinese organization sponsored cultural activities. So in those places, you can see sizable or even large number of Chinese. For example, the Chinese community here have annual China Day celebration. Okay, usually it happens in mid-May. It's 2 days, Saturday and Sunday. Okay, I'm pretty sure Professor Min Liu is in that involved in that committee to prepare the China Day celebration. And so here, even though without the this visible Chinatown gate or other business as serving as a boundary. However, we can still find the social boundaries of cultural community in language school. So the Chinese language school in St. Louis, they are part-time operating, only Saturday, once a week, only Saturday. And they don't have their own property, but they rent a room or rooms from public facility, okay, be a middle school or some community colleges. Okay. And they would run class. When the children were attending the Chinese language class or other Chinese skills, parents would wait here, chatting, exchange information. So actually it served as a community gathering, right? It's a kind of like a mini cultural center. And likewise, the Chinese cultural activity. This is China Day, China Days in 1999. Okay, I took some pictures. And they have all kinds of activities of food exhibit, acrobats, and mock wedding. This is mock wedding. And display of Chinese calligraphy or tea ceremony or parade. So oftentimes they can attract more than 10,000 people here. Okay, the mostly are Chinese. So when you are there, you're surprised to see, so many Chinese. Okay, but during the weekday, they dispersed in their workplace because the new Chinese residents after 1960s, they are more educated and more integrated professionally. Okay, most of them were hired in the major business like Anheuser-Busch, Washiyu, you know, what is this? A pharmacy? What is it called? Pharmacy. I guess it's blocked. Okay, the major business owners of the town. That's 80% of the population, and also some self-employed small business. So those two types of people make up 80% of the Chinese population. While in the Chinatown in San Francisco or New York, 60% of the Chinatown population are working class laborers. Okay, so because of this different composition of demographic, they felt there's no need to have a Chinatown, to have this grocery store or restaurant to hire Chinese labor. So this is an outline of Chinese in St. Louis and Chicago. So now we're going to move on to the new challenge, present challenges facing Asian Americans. There are many challenges. You can see, you know, economic challenges, cultural challenge, social challenge, political challenge, okay, various. But scholars generally identified those most pressing issues, okay. Several of them listed here. One is political participation, okay. So since the 1960s or 1950s, Asian Americans have been gradually participating mainstream politics more and more. However, this level of participation is still limited, okay, compared to other ethnic minorities. And the second, okay, which is also the problem we are facing now, is the Asian hate crime. How to stop it, how to deal with it. And the third one is identity, okay. Is your identity, how do you define your identity? Are you more Chinese or are you more American? Are you both? For the first generation immigrant, it's easy for you to identify yourself as a Chinese. However, for this second generation, third generation American-born Asian Americans, it's very hard for them to associate with their homeland culture. So this AAPI hate normally we use the term AAPI, but we add one more A, means Asia here. Okay, so it's Asian American Pacific Islanders. So since 2020, the pandemic spread in the US, and the various forms of the hate crimes have plagued the Chinese, okay? From spitting to verbal harassment, the Chinese will call the slurs, chinks or Chinaman, and go back to your home, to beating, to vandalisms in the small Asian-owned business, and to even looting, burning, and murdering. Okay. For example, this year in February, 84-year-old Thai gentleman died as a result of being shoveled down to the ground. Then he couldn't get up. He was in hospital for 1 week and died. Okay, that happened in San Francisco. And then in March 16, okay, this notorious Atlanta SPAR shooting killed 8 people. 6 of them were Asian Americans. And following day, just the day after that, the 2 women attacked the Asian-owned beauty store in Houston, okay, and physically attacked the store owner. And according to Stop AAPI Hate, so this is an agency jointly owned by several community organizations in San Francisco, but headquartered in San Francisco State University. So this agency began to receive reportings of various forms of Asian hate crimes. From March 2020 to March 2021, over 3,800 reported cases already. And Pew Research Center also did a survey. And the survey found that 3 out of 10 Asian Americans reported experienced racist jokes or slurs since the onset of a pandemic. And here, this young man was beaten just because he was Asian. And on the right picture, a Chinese gift store in New York was vandalized. And this is this 84-year-old Thai man by the name of Vicha Pandanapaki. And a very nice man, you can see here. But when he was taking a walk in late January in San Francisco, Chinatown, and suddenly, and this man from behind pushed him to the ground and then ran away. And the surveillance camera caught this suspect, and he was arrested, and he was found by the name of Antoine Watson, a troubled 19-year-old African-American young man. And then this Atlanta SPAR shooting. There are 3 salons, okay, massage salons in Atlanta. 2 of them just next to each other on the same block. Another one is several blocks away. So the suspect, his name is Aaron Long. The suspect actually was a client of those salons. And he went through the sex rehabilitation. Then he came out of it. The day when he committed this crime, I read a lot of reports afterward. He came here, parked his car in the parking lot of Golden Spar. So usually those clients, they don't park in front. There's a parking lot in the back, okay? So those salons, just like regular salons, they have this price listed there. Massage, usually they charge $50 to $60 for 1 hour massage. But There's some business provided that is between the employee and the clientele, okay? Up to them to negotiate the price and what type of service, okay? And because of this incident, there's some inside story leaked out, okay? So usually this extra service usually is conducted during the evening, and the clients would park the car behind. At a busy time, you know, the nearby neighbor said they could see this car not stopping. Okay, they just like you're in the driveway window of the restaurant, fast food restaurant. Okay, they have their car and play music and wait for their turn. and it was known as a red light district. But generally during the daytime, it was fine, normal, and the local area resident felt they haven't had problem. When this happened on that day, he was there in the parking lot, sitting in his car for more than an hour. We don't know what he did there. Then he went to Golden Spar, and he spent more than an hour there also. We don't know what he did either. Okay, so later on, those victims had their different eyewitness confessions, investigations, but these details are still not released. So there, he killed 4 people. Then he went to the next one, just like 3 or 4 stores down there, killed 2 more. Then he drove his car to another spar, which is about 50 miles drive away. And there he killed 2 more. So altogether 8 people died, and 6 of them a woman, 4 Korean women and 2 Chinese women. So one of these Chinese women is the owner of Golden Spar. She came from China in 2012 through marriage. Okay, she married an American man. She brought her children from her previous marriage, and she was known as a very enthusiastic and bubbly person, always happy, always smiling. And she was working very hard. She moved to Atlanta 5 years ago. Initially, she was doing this nail business or massage for other employee, other shop owners. Then he learned the skill and he started his shop, and pretty soon he also owned 2 more nail stores. Okay, so this is quite a successful businesswoman, and there's no record relating her with any illegal activities. And woman here is a Korean woman. She was known as Mrs. Grant. Okay, she probably married an American man by the name Grant, surname is Grant. Her first name is a Korean name. And she was raising her 2 boys. Older one is 21-year-old, the younger ones maybe is 18 or so, just by herself. She worked as an employee in one of this massage salon. And her children didn't know what she was doing, but they also, as they grow older, they also wondered, why she always worked during the evening. Okay. Finally, this older son confronted the mother and realized what the mother's job was. Okay, but that was the mean for them to survive. And she was trying to make money and trying to get out of this business as soon as possible. But before her dream was realized, she was killed. And this boy, both of them were distraught. And the older boy released a lot of their family information on the social media, on his social media account. So from there, I learned the story about his mother and how they discussed with their mother. So now this boy said, I'm very sad, but I even can't afford to breathe. Okay, I have to first take care of the burial of my mother, then take care of my younger brother, because he becomes a guardian, legal guardian of his younger brother. And so this kind of a hate crime, if we look at back in Asian American history, you can date it all the way back to the mid-19th century. That time, the Asians were called yellow peril. Okay, so this term came from the Mongols in 13th, 14th century, when they swept through the Asian and the Euro continent and established their Mongol empire, and they were called yellow peril, right, by Europeans. So here in the 1870s, because more and more Asian laborers came, so white laborers also labeled them as yellow peril. Okay. And oftentimes, whenever there's a tension, whenever there's a economic stress, they would be blamed on, they would be scapegoated on. For example, in 1871, there's a massacre in Chinatown in Los Angeles. What happened is that, so this is what the LA Chinatown looked like in 1870s. Okay, it's pretty shabby and limited. That year, this massacre started with town fighting within the Chinese community. But then it spread and over and become a white mob, a group of white mob attacked the Chinatown, started looting, burning, killing, and lynched. Several Chinese were lynched. And they searched their quarter, opened the trunk, trying to look for valuables. And one Chinese man has a golden ring on his finger. So one of the mobsters was trying to move this gold ring. However, it was too tight to be removed. So he just used the dagger, chopped his finger along with the ring. And Chinese, the entire quarters were burned. Okay, this was known as the 1871 massacre. Then in 1875, the Page Act was passed. And this act was, on surface, was to prohibit the entry of women who are conducting immoral business, meaning prostitution. It didn't specify Chinese. However, because the most women in that period are Chinese, mostly Chinese, and they worked in a brothel. Okay, so this act singled out the Chinese and sexualized the Chinese and fetishized them as well. So Chinese in the late 19th century, generally they were portrayed as a show business piece, like those ladies here, or prostitutes in the brothel. And the Chinese men who usually worked in the gold mine, okay, here's this gold, they use this panning method, or railroad workers. But after railroad, the transcontinental railroad was completed in 1869, they're not needed anymore. So the white laborers, nativists, and farmers pushed the Congress to pass this 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, banned the Chinese from coming. Then in 1941, another groups of Asia, the Japanese, were also targeted, because in on December 7th, 1941, Japanese Navy bombarded, okay, this with a sudden attack, bombarded Pearl Harbor. And that forced the American government to enter the war, declare the war, and the Japanese became enemy. In order to prevent the potential spies, okay, the Japanese immigrants serving as a spy for Japanese empire, about 120,000 Japanese immigrants, along with their American-born children, were rounded up in 10 concentration, or they're called internment camps, mostly located in the mountain states. A couple of in California, also in the desert area, and one in Arkansas, in Midwest. Okay. And here, another incident is Vincent Chen, murder of Vincent Chen in 1982 in Detroit. So Vincent Chen was going to get married, and he went to a bar to celebrate his bachelor party. But then he ran into a quarrel with two European men, and then that evolved into physical contact. And these two men mistaking him as Japanese, okay, because they were the unemployed auto workers, father and son, and they are thinking he was Japanese. Because of the rise of the Japanese auto industry in 1980s, that resulted in the decline in the bankruptcy of the American auto factories in Detroit. So they vented out on him, and they used the baseball bat and beat him to death. And this incident angered the Asian community. There's a massive protest. However, these two suspects only were sentenced with a very light sentence. They probably paid some fine, stayed in jail for 10 years. So the Asian, on one hand, they were labeled as yellow peril, right? They are unwelcome. On the other hand, since 1960s, Asian Americans were elevated this pedestal. They are labeled as a model minority. It started with an article written by a Berkeley sociologist, okay, by the name of Patterson, Professor Patterson. So he wrote in the Popular Journal article praised how successful the Japanese are, how the Chinese and Japanese achieved academically and occupationally. So therefore, model minority became a synonym for Asian Americans, and mainly Chinese and Japanese Americans, which is not, has no base, okay? Because 1970 and 1980s census indicate that Japanese and Chinese media family income was $1,000 or $2,000 higher than the national average. But the critics said this model minority theory is not an accurate reflection of Asian American reality, because most Asians live in the area like New York, San Francisco, or Hawaii, where you have a high income and also high cost. So on the surface, looks like they have a higher income, but they also have a high cost. Another reason is that most Asian families have two income earners. Both husband and wife work. That's how they have a higher family income. However, the majority of Asian Americans don't have such a privilege. They don't earn income that high. More than 30% Asian Americans actually living on the poverty line. Okay, so the critics said a model minority theory had been utilized actually to discriminate AAPI community, because since they are portrayed as successful, so they would not need as much public assistance as other minorities who had more urgent need. Okay, so in allocation of a federal fund or state fund, Asian American communities often suffered with a lower funding allocation. And it was also blamed as used as a tool to pitch one minority against another. Okay, so since the Chinese or Japanese, the Asians could work their way up, why Hispanic American or African American can imitate their example? Why can't you follow them? So actually, both this negative yellow peril or this flattering mild minority, both are inaccurate reflection of AAPI reality. And they either demoralize or dehumanize AAPI or deflect their struggle, okay? Their struggle, their plight facing most AAPI population. So how do we deal with this Asian hate situation, which is spreading and not going down? So I was reading even yesterday, there's in New York, there's Asian man was beaten and then it was shot, okay, continuously the physical assault in various sites. So specialists came up with allyship, okay, the term allyship. Lindy, probably you know it better, okay, that's your field. What is allyship? Okay, it's a strategic mechanism used by individuals to become collaborators, accomplices, and co-conspirators who fight injustice and promote equality, equity in the workplace through supportive personal relationships and the public acts of sponsorship and advocacy. Okay, so use a simple language. Actually, allyship. My understanding is just education. To educate yourself and educate other people. Okay, raise awareness and be willing, be brave to defend human rights. Okay. Anyway, it's not just Asian hate. Crime is not crime, right? So today the Asians are targeted. Tomorrow might be another group will be targeted. The second is activism. Okay, you need to actively participate and perform in this performative allyship. Raise your voice. Okay, because Asian Americans have been generally stereotyped as a quiet or invisible minority groups. Okay, their tradition and their cultural values discourage people to be aggressive, to be provocative. But this situation has been changing. Recent years, you see more and more young Asians are protesting, are voicing their opinions. And the third one is to have solidarity with other marginalized groups. And here, I plug in some of my book. We're talking about education, educate ourselves and others. There are tons of books on Asian Americans. And here I pick up some of my Chinese in St. Louis, Chinese in Chicago. That's what we covered in this presentation. And this one's Voice of the Heart is a collection of oral history of Asian Americans, women. I and my students interviewed among the 300,000, then there are 54 cases were selected. So this book is very good oral history on Asian immigration community and family. And then I also edited this encyclopedia, 2-volume on Asian American history and culture. Okay, I'm sure anyone can find them easily in your public library, school library, public library. And young Asians, okay, as I said earlier, now more and more willing to walk on the street to demonstrate, stop Asian hate. On the day of Atlanta shooting, I know there's a candlelight vigil in St. Louis in that weekend. And there are more than 100 Chinese led by the community activists, including our own Dr. Liu. They had a candlelight vigil in that weekend. Okay. And they also had other type of demonstrations. And here I borrowed this chart from this site. Okay, here's the source. And this chart kind of have this diagram simplified what is performative ally practices. Okay, so that is ask, listen, show up, and speak up. Okay, so those are the major strategies to be an active member and also join other allies and to raise your voice, okay, to be waiting to fight for injustice, to defend human rights. All right, I'm going to stop at this point. I will leave the floor to the audience. See if you have any question or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ling. Much appreciated. That was like a lot of good history that I would never have known without your presentation. So thank you for that. We did actually have one person put a question into the chat, so I'm going to share that with you now. So the first question, and we probably have about 10-ish minutes for questions. So if people have a question, you're welcome to ask yourself. But here's the first one is, in the past, do you think the business of a restaurant was the number one in their businesses? Oh, let me start over. Now that we know the contribution that Chinese have made in the past years, the question is, in the past, do you think the business of a restaurant was number one in the business?
Okay, so that depends on what time period you're looking at. Before 1965, Chinese laundry was the major business, and the grocery store. Then the restaurant was third or second. But after 1965, especially after 1970s, when Nixon visited China, and also when the country was involved in Vietnam War, so it brought Asia closer to the country. And American public had more and more awareness of Asian culture and also fondness of Asian cuisine. So Chinese restaurant mushroomed across the country. For example, in St. Louis, there are as many as currently 500 or 600 Chinese restaurants scattered around. There are some larger ones along Olive Boulevard, right? That's also kind of like a Chinatown area. But there are many more in the shopping malls or businesses strip serving this large community. So the restaurant business nowadays in St. Louis, they're not concentrated, but they're scattered, okay, in order to serve a larger audience, a larger clientele. While in Chinatown, Chicago, because there's a larger size of Chinatown. So in Chinatown, you can see the many big restaurants clustered there. And that similar situation also can be found in New York or San Francisco. But it depends on what you're looking at, where you're looking at. If you look at St. Louis, among the Chinese business, I don't know, you say the past, how past do you mean? Past you mean before 1960 or past before 2000? So if it was before 60s, restaurant was getting more and more replacing laundry. Initially, laundry was the #1 business, then restaurant and grocery store. But after the 1970s, most laundry closed. As I said earlier, the only surviving one in St. Louis was Samba Laundry. So restaurant, you're right, became the #1 business among the Chinese small business owners. But there are also there's retail stores and other Chinese small business. If you look at the Chinese business on Olive Boulevard, you see there's a Chinese, there are 2 Chinese newspapers offices there. There's a number of doctor's clinic. There's 2 Chinese herb stores. There are 3 or 4 large Chinese grocery markets. And there are around 10, I don't have the exact number, okay, but at least 10 or more big Chinese restaurants on that boulevard, okay, Olive Boulevard. And also there are other business or like a garage. And there's stores selling grass, you know, the window. And gift stores and travel agencies. Okay, so those are also the Chinese business. If you have a chance, you can check out my Chinese St. Louis. So in this book, I divide the Chinese community into roughly pre-1960 and post-1960s. Okay, in pre-1960, that was Hop Alley. In post-1960s till now, I call it cultural community because there is no physical Chinatown anymore. But we do see some clusters of Chinese business, mainly along the Olive Boulevard. You can take a note. Let me find on this page. Okay. On page 144, there I have a chart comparing Chinese restaurant, laundries, and grocery stores in St. Louis City and the county between 1952 and 1990. Okay, and looks like laundry between 1952 to 1966, laundry was a major #1 business. And the restaurants was the second business. But after 1960s, restaurant become #1. Then followed by both grocery stores and laundries. Okay, so you're right. Okay, and for the contemporary Chinatown business, I also have a chart. Let me see if I can find it. Okay.
I was gonna say, we also have a couple more questions when you're.
Okay, so you can look for it, okay? Just summarize it, okay? Restaurant, you can see, right, yeah, is still the largest business in the post-1960s Chinese community. Okay.
I just want to make sure we have enough time for the other questions as well.
Okay,
So,
yeah.
Ning, you're up next.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Professor. I'm so glad to be listening to this presentation. I just wanted to make one comment and then ask a question. When our speaker uses the term performative allyship, I believe she's referring to the all-round kind of commitment that we make as allies, as we not only show our support for each other in words, but also in action. So I wanted to clarify that. So my question I actually wanted to ask you for some sort of like look into the crystal ball and to tell us where our Asian American communities around the country how we should regroup and kind of recharge our energies now that we're going through really challenging time, not only with the pandemic, but also the unprecedentedly high levels of anti-Asian hate. So with these crises, there definitely are opportunities for our communities to grow and to reach out. So what would you say are your advice for young Asian American activists or community organizers or organizations?
Okay, it's a great question. You're right. I talked about this performative allyship. I'm not expert in this regard. Okay, I just recently I began to read about it and study about it. It is just as you said. It's a more active, more performative. Okay, not just the words, but even actions. Like for example, wearing a mask, that's an action, or you can peel your mask, that's also action, performative, and more physical visibility, okay? So that's how I understand the performative, and also building allyship, building solidarity with other groups of minority or other type of Americans. My advice for our community, I looked at, since the pandemic started, I have been looking at following the situation closely. And I kind of can sort them into several type of, it's not my advice, okay? So those are, I have observed from top down, okay? From national leaders, for example, congressmen, congresswomen, senators. In Congress, there is an Asian American caucus. Its president is Judy Chu, who and her colleagues have been actively conducting meetings, rallies, explain and referring the community to a legal expert, okay, provide advice, legal advice. So when they facing harassment or crime, how should they handle it? Okay, just like you need to report to police. You need to, and also self-defense. Okay, right now there are various workshop. You probably know that the Taekwondo school is very popular. Okay, the martial arts, self-defense techniques, and also education. Okay, through education, go to legal advice, and in that regard, PBS premiered a five section TV series. It's called Asian Americans. Okay, so as a tool to educate the general public on the struggles and the success of Asian Americans. And also, I'm sure you're doing that, okay, at all levels, from federal, state, city, and community levels. Various Asian American professional community and professional organization and the community organizations are also all organizing workshop, teaching their youngsters how to raise awareness and how to perform this active performative allyship. My suggestion is, it's in a way it's kind of common sense. Okay, just when if you see things as injustice, you need to point it out. Okay, If you don't have the ability, but you need to report to law enforcement, okay, legal authorities. And you also need to learn to protect yourself. And in Asian communities across the country, in the recent months, for example, in New York, San Francisco, Oakland, and Chicago organized this gun owners patrolling system the earliest. Okay, that's why it protected the Chicago Chinatown from looting, burning. Okay, so Chicago Chinatown actually was the only intact Chinatown in the United States. And other things like formed body system, right? You're trying not to go in the night or go to remote place alone. Have your buddy. And many community also organized volunteers to form this buddy system and provide escort to elderly and to women during the night or in the remote area. Okay, so various practice, and people also trying all kinds of innovations. But the principle is, I think, just like this chart I showed. Okay, be active. You actively educate other people. You raise question. Okay, you take action. Be willing to stand out and stand up. And also be willing to listen to other people and form airlines, collaborations with other groups of people. All right, I don't know if I.
Yeah, I think that covered a lot. Min's nodding, so I think you covered it, yeah.
Okay.
So we probably have time for one last question, and we have someone with their hand raised.
Yeah, I see
Yep.
Casey.
Yes, Case, yeah, so.
Yeah, Casey, yeah. So good to see your face.
Yeah, it's good to see your face too, Dr. Ling. Yeah, I go by Case now. So hi. So speaking of back whenever you were discussing, and actually someone mentioned it in the chat. Speaking of younger generations wanting to listen, wanting to know stories, and you also mentioned in a previous book that your students had helped you do research. And I was in your oral history class in spring of 2017. And I was wondering if any of the oral history that your students have recorded, and I was wondering if that has actually contributed to any of your more recent research.
Recently not. The book I mentioned earlier, Voice of the Heart.
Yeah, I remember reading it.
You have that. Yeah, you have that one. That one was oral history I did since 1980s. And then in 1990s, I taught several classes of Asian American history. Students did the oral history projects, and some of the students work select there. However, I have in my possession many more interviews which were not used in any formal writing. However, they are rich resource. If you have a need, you're welcome. You contact me, and they are in organized way, systematic way. I have been thinking about to find a depository to store them, so it can be accessed by public.
That's really awesome. Yeah, I really enjoyed that project. I was just curious if you had used it since. So that's great to know. Yeah, I'll definitely let you know if there's ever. I'll connect with you if there's if it comes up. Thanks.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
And Dr. Ling, I found one more question in the chat, so here we go.
Okay,
yes. Have you done any research to correlate Chinese in the Mississippi Delta grocery stores business to the Chinese in St. Louis and Chicago?
I didn't do that myself. but I can refer some book to you and refer some scholars who did that area. I did write textbook on Asian American history. So I have a general knowledge of Asian American history across the country throughout the centuries. But as far as a specialized monograph, a research, a single topic book, I haven't done that. I know an elderly scholar whose name is Jiang Jun. If you're interested in that, afterward you can email me. My email is hlin@truman.edu. And I can connect you with this gentleman. He was, by training, he was a sociologist. But after he retired at 70, he started a new career, writing history, starting from his family history, because he lived in the Delta, I think Georgia, somewhere in Georgia, okay. That's where he grew up, and his parents had a grocery store, maybe also run restaurant. So based on his growing up experience, he wrote a book. First is called The Chopsticks, okay, on the Chinese restaurant. Then he wrote another book on Chinese laundry. Then another. He has been quite prolific and has ever since he has written quite a few books, and he is his own publisher and distributor. He would carry the books to professional conference and giving talks. He would contact the local museum from place to place and carry his books and give a talk, then sell his books to disseminate his research. So that is the source. But there's a classic work on Mississippi Delta Chinese, which is a book by Lucy Cohen. Okay, let me find it on the bibliography. If you can get a copy of my book, Chinese in St. Louis, from a bookstore or from a library, in the end of the book, there's a bibliography. And they are listed by the last name alphabetically, alphabetically author's last name. Okay, let me find Cohen. Oh, okay. See, I got it. Okay. So on page 270, Lucy Cohen, last name is Cohen. First name is Lucy, Lucy. The title of the book is Chinese in the Post-Civil War South. Then subtitle is A People Without a History. Okay, it was published by Louisiana State University Press in 1984. I'm sure you can easily find this book. And that is regarded as one of the reputable and early work and one of the few work focusing on Mississippi Delta Chinese or Asian communities.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ling. I appreciate that. And I did a last call. I don't see any questions. So I think that is a final thank you so much. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much.
I feel like it was so much, and I appreciate it. And I love that you tailored it to the area. I think that was really helpful for us to know in the context of where we are, our institution and things like that. So thank you so much. And to everyone who's here, thank you so much for being a part of the program today and listening and asking questions. Additionally, I wanted to let you know, as our chancellor mentioned early today, that there is a panel which Professor Dr. Min Liu will also be on Thursday. I'm looking currently for my flyer. So I don't know, Min, do you want to mention it a little bit while I'm looking for the flyer to put it into the chat?
Sure, yeah. Thank you so much for that wonderful kind of historical, but also regional overview of history. That Thursday presentation, I'm excited because of the focus on particularly on local data collection regarding AAPI hate. So specifically, we will hear from data that's collected at SIUE and also data that's collected in St. Louis. The second part of the data will come from a group of Asian American high school students, and the SIUE data will be from a lot of Asian students, but also international students as well. So I look forward to that discussion. We will also have one of the panelists will be Judge Judy Draper. She will offer a unique historical perspective as well, given her biracial background. So yeah, thank you for that time.
Yeah, and I dropped the flyer into the chat. I also included the Zoom link as well, so you don't have to necessarily go to the flyer. I know that several on this call were actually at our panel 1. It is actually the same link. We did that on purpose to make it a little bit easier for you to log back in. So we would welcome you back. We would welcome new faces to the panel. And that will be the final event of not only the celebration here on campus, but it will also be the final event of our semester. So we really hope that you come. I think it's going to be wonderful information. Again, thank you so much for being here today. And I wish you much joy on the journey this evening. And I hope to see you again soon. So thank you all and have a lovely evening. Thank you again, Dr. Ling.
Yeah, thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Min. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Good, good. I have to stop. Where's my recording there again? And thank you again, Dr. Ling. We really appreciate it.